Ever get that feeling like you want to dive deep into something really complex, but without, making your brain feel like it just ran a marathon?
I know exactly what you mean.
That's what we aim for here.
Absolutely.
And today we've got something particularly interesting to unpack. You might have heard that Saturn's rings are going to, well, disappear.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic headline, isn't it?
It is.
That makes you think of like some sort of a grand cosmic illusion.
Yeah.
And in a way it is. And today, March 23rd, 2025 is, the day this event kicks off, or is predicted to kick off at least.
Exactly. And before anyone starts picturing Saturn just suddenly, like, naked, floating through space without its rings, we should clarify it's not really a vanishing act.
Right.
We've been digging into this. And it turns out this apparent disappearance, which kicks off around 4 p.m. Eastern Time, is really a trick of perspective. It's all about how Earth and Saturn are lining up.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really break this down for everyone. We want to explore why this happens, pinpoint when it's happening, and really get to what this tells us about how our solar system works and about Saturn itself.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Starting today, Sunday, March 23rd, 2025, around 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's a little later tonight. For those of you in India, Saturn's rings, that iconic part of its image, are going to seem to vanish when we look at it from here on Earth.
Right.
And this effect is going to hang around for a few days.
Yeah, and the really important thing to keep in mind is that the rings themselves aren't actually going anywhere.
Right.
It's not like Saturn's shedding this spectacular feature.
Right.
What we're seeing is a purely visual phenomenon. It all boils down to our viewing angle relative to those rings.
Yeah, the articles we were looking at used a really helpful way to picture this. Imagine you're holding just a regular piece of paper. If you're looking at the flat surface, you see the whole thing. But if you turn that paper so you're looking at it edge on, it practically disappears.
No.
It's just a thin line.
That's a great analogy. So Saturn's rings are absolutely immense in terms of their width. We're talking hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But when you compare that to their thickness, they're incredibly thin.
Wow.
Some estimates put them at only tens of meters thick in certain places.
Wow.
So when Earth's line of sight lines up almost perfectly with the plane of these rings, which are super wide but incredibly thin, they basically disappear against the backdrop of Saturn itself.
It's all about the angle. So when does this specific alignment actually happen? Is it a common thing?
So this alignment where we're basically looking at the edge of Saturn's rings happens roughly every 13 to 15 years.
Okay.
And you have to consider that, Earth and Saturn are both orbiting the sun at different speeds, and their positions relative to each other are constantly changing.
Right.
So these periodic alignments are just kind of a natural outcome of the way they're moving through space.
Interesting. So it's not just some random fluke. It's a predictable kind of part of their celestial dance. Now, I remember reading that Saturn's tilt plays a big role in this whole thing, too.
It does.
How does that factor into this disappearing act?
This is where things get even more interesting, I think. So Saturn, much like our own planet Earth, rotates on a tilted axis.
Okay.
And for Saturn, that tilt is about 26.7 degrees relative to its orbital path around the sun.
Okay.
And what that means is that over the course of Saturn's journey around the sun, which takes almost 30 years, the angle at which we see those rings from Earth changes quite a bit.
So it's not just us lining up, it's also how Saturn is kind of presenting its rings to us at different points in its orbit.
Exactly. So as Saturn goes around the sun, we see the rings tilted toward us, then we see them edge on, then they tilt away from us, then back to edge on again.
Wow.
And, the articles actually pointed out a pretty surprising timeline. After this almost disappearance we're talking about now, in March 2025, the rings will reappear. But then, get this, they'll practically vanish again in November of the same year.
Wait, another one so soon? That's unexpected. What causes that second dip?
That second near disappearance in November happens because of Saturn's tilt.
Okay.
Our viewing angle keeps shifting just slightly after that first edge-on alignment in March, so we actually end up passing through that ring plane again before the year is over. It's almost like if you were looking at that piece of paper we talked about before, and you just barely glanced at the edge twice in a row as you were very subtly changing how you were holding it.
That makes it even more interesting. And then, if I remember correctly, the rings will be back in full view by around 2032?
Yes.
So it's a temporary thing, this whole cycle.
That's right. The cycle just keeps going as Saturn moves along its orbit. The rings will become more and more visible again until the next time we line up with that edge on perspective, another 13 to 15 years or so down the line.
All right, so we've covered when and why they seem to disappear. Let's talk about the stars of the show here, Saturn's rings. What exactly are they made of?
Well, according to the articles, Saturn's rings are made up of just an incredible number of particles, billions upon billions of icy particles and little bits of rock.
Wow.
It's like a gigantic flattened cloud of cosmic snow and debris, and it's all orbiting Saturn.
Billions of particles.
Yeah,
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around the scale of it, and the visual spectacle that must create.
it really is mind-boggling. And this whole system has captivated astronomers and just, regular stargazers for centuries.
Mm.
Galileo, back in the early 1600s, was one of the first to observe them through a telescope. Although back then his instruments couldn't really show them as rings, so there was some mystery about what he was actually seeing.
Ah,
But over time, they've become one of the most recognizable features of our solar system.
and the variety and the sizes of these particles is pretty amazing too.
It is.
From those tiny little grains all the way up to chunks as big as like a house or a school bus.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about the environment within the rings themselves?
I think it points to a very dynamic environment.
Yeah.
There are constant collisions happening, gravitational interactions between particles of all sizes.
Uh-huh.
Even though from our distance they look very calm and serene, there's this continuous process of fragmentation and accretion going on within those rings.
Wow. And that brings us to another really interesting point that the articles touched on the origin of these rings.
Right.
Sounds like it's still kind of a mystery to scientists.
It definitely is. The
Okay.
formation of Saturn's rings is one of those questions that astronomers are still trying to figure out definitively.
So what are some of the main ideas that they're looking at right now?
Well, the articles highlighted two main theories. One of the leading ideas is that the rings are basically leftovers from a moon or maybe a comet that got a little too close to Saturn and was destroyed. Saturn has incredibly strong gravity, and what we call tidal forces could rip that celestial body apart if it crossed a certain boundary called the Roche limit.
Okay.
That's the point where Saturn's gravity would basically overcome the moon's own gravity and just pull it to pieces.
So a pretty violent cosmic event that led to these beautiful rings.
Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic scenario.
This is the other main theory.
The other idea is that the stuff making up the rings could be primordial. Basically, leftover material from when Saturn itself was forming over 4 billion years ago.
Oh, wow.
So you have to picture the early solar system. There was this huge disk of dust and gas surrounding the young planets. And some of that material could have stayed in orbit around Saturn and never actually formed into a larger moon. Instead, it just kind of clumped together and spread out to become the rings we see today.
So it could be debris from this huge cosmic event, or it could be the original building blocks that never quite came together to make a moon. Both pretty awe-inspiring to think about.
They really are.
Yeah.
And the fact that the origin of something as prominent as Saturn's rings is still up for debate just shows how much we still have to learn about our own cosmic backyard.
Absolutely. So kind of bringing it back to this event happening today, you might be thinking, okay, this is all cool, but why should I personally care that Saturn's rings are seeming to disappear?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to why these sorts of events are so fascinating to us.
Yeah.
This temporary disappearance of Saturn's rings, it's like this perfect illustration of how dynamic and interconnected our solar system is.
Right.
The exact movements and positions of planets and their features can lead to these events that seem almost magical, but we can observe them and understand them from here on Earth.
It's like one of those moments where you realize that what seems like a really distant, abstract astronomical event is actually governed by these elegant principles of physics and orbital mechanics.
It is.
It's a reminder that the universe works like a huge, intricate clock in a way.
Exactly. And even though the rings going edge on for a few days might not directly affect our lives here on Earth, it gives us a chance to connect with the universe and really appreciate its beauty and vastness.
Right.
And I think it's also a reminder that even when something seems to vanish, like these prominent rings, it's often just a matter of perspective, and you'll be back in their full glory.
Yeah, it's not goodbye, it's see you later.
Exactly.
Now, for anyone out there who happens to own a telescope, even a relatively small one, this could be a particularly interesting time to try and observe Saturn.
It could.
While you won't see those big bright rings, you might be able to get a glimpse of just how thin they actually are when they're almost edge on to us.
Yeah, that's a really unique opportunity to see Saturn looking quite different than its usual self.
Yeah, it's a cool opportunity. So to sum it all up, the big takeaway for you today is that the disappearance of Saturn's rings, it's not an actual vanishing act. It's this awesome cosmic illusion caused by Earth's alignment with the incredibly thin edge of those rings. And this alignment, it's a natural result of Saturn's tilt as it orbits the sun. And while they might seem to fade away for a few days, starting today, March 23rd, 2025, they'll be back in full force in a few years.
And when you think about it, this event makes you realize that there are countless other events happening out there in space that we don't even know about.
It does.
The universe is this constantly changing place filled with movements and alignments and transformations happening at scales that are just incredibly hard to grasp.
It's mind-boggling to think about.
It is.
And that leads to this final thought I'll leave you with. Think about all the other disappearances or transformations that might be happening right now across the vastness of the universe because of how these celestial bodies are constantly moving and interacting. What other seemingly impossible events are happening silently, just waiting for us to discover them and figure out the science behind them, makes you want to keep exploring and learning about the wonders of our universe.
It really does.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Of course.